Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Nelson and the matosinhos.tech team for the invitation, and of course the Matosinhos municipality for letting us be in this historic space. This is my hometown as well, so it is a pleasure for me to be here today with you all. So let's start. So I'm going to talk about game development from AAA to Z. And as you know by now, my name is João Xavier, and I'm currently working as a technical director at FunPlus, just south of here in Lisbon. So why am I here? So as Batil pointed out, I've been working in the industry for a while, and I've moved around. So I am from here, as I mentioned. First, I moved to Lisbon, and I lived there for a couple of years, but it was not until I moved to Germany that I started my journey in game development. I worked in a couple of mobile gaming companies, then moved on to AA, where I released my first boxed game. It was very exciting. Moved to Sweden, to Malmö, where I worked at Tarsier on Little Nightmares 2, and finally at Ubisoft Massive, where I had a pleasure to also work in Star Wars Outlaws as a lead programmer. So what brought me back to Portugal 11 years later? I have a very new and exciting challenge with a studio starting up in Lisbon, and I'm sure sometime soon I'll be able to tell you more about it. Let's get started. Game development. Question that I'm asked all the time, even just a couple of minutes ago today: how does one get started in the industry? Even though I have an engineering background, I would say my first choice would be gaming schools. It's don't maybe have so many in Portugal, but in Sweden, for instance, there's the Game Assembly, Future Games. Take the Netherlands, you have Breda for engineering. In Belgium, you have Houwes, which is a popular school of arts. And I can tell you that we've had a lot of interns from all of these places over at Ubisoft in Sweden. It is by far one of the surefire ways of getting into the industry. Take nothing for granted, but it does help you get in. Because normally you have internships as part of your curriculum, and the fact that you have been in one of these companies will definitely help you get into the next one, or even stay and continue working there. Hobby project is one of the traditional ways of getting into the industry. It can be hard to do, it can be hard to find a time, but any hiring manager will recognize the effort that you've put into projects of your own. And I have seen just kick-ass hobby projects. It's amazing to see what people can do when they're really passionate about it. Quality assurance roles is also one of the ways people tell you that it's easier to get started with, especially more junior, since it has less of a specialty. It is still a hard job to do, make no mistake, but it's typically easier to start as a tester, even though their job is complicated. It is not just playing games. Your local community is invaluable. Events like this and many others that are related to game development, you'll just meet a lot of people who can be your coworkers in the future. Engage with them, interact with them on Discord, on events. Even if it takes a little bit getting used to getting out of your shell, it's worth it, I promise. Games conference can be quite expensive to get to. Another good way of getting into the middle of a lot of the industry and networking is to volunteer at some of them. It's definitely a way that helps, say, for instance, a Nordic game, or even bigger conferences like Gamescom. If you can find a spot, it is generally worth taking. Finally, again, and I'm going to underline this, you cannot take anything for granted. It is an infamous industry when it comes to getting in, so it does take perseverance. It does take you being a little daring and being able to just show up, plus a little bit of luck. So how did I get started? It was actually none of this. Just goes to show that everybody has to make their own path. So I do have an engineering background, as I mentioned. I've studied here at the Faculty of Engineering, University of Porto, FIOP. And I've started off when I moved to Lisbon as a consultant in mobile apps. That was actually one interest I took at the end of my degree. That allowed me then open the door to my first job, which was as a mobile game developer. And it was 11 years ago, roughly 12, and I was invited for an interview to create a Pong game in OpenGL. I don't know if you've ever had to actually program OpenGL. It is very fun. It takes a lot of lines to even show a triangle on the screen. And sitting under pressure and having to do something like this, it's not something I would recommend for the faint of heart. Luckily, it kind of worked out for me. And then now they found themselves with another developer. So they had me port their whole OpenGL-based engine that they were doing for iOS to Java, and then the game that they were making for iOS as well. I loved working the engine. It was a great time. Why do people do this? Why do you subject yourself to stuff like this? Most of people will say passion, right? Like, you've played games before. Likely, if you're in the industry, because you've liked games at some point, you like making them. It's not 100% of the people, I can tell you, but this is one of the main reasons. It is pretty fun. It is pretty fun to make games. It's pretty fun to see the stuff coming together and becoming the game that you'd like to play as a player. But also, it is not always fun, and this is very important. It is not a hobby in the end. It is still a job, and there will be parts of your job which aren't always fun. There's phases that are complicated, there's ups and downs, like with every job. But ultimately, it's good for you to remind yourself why you're here in the first place, and that can be refreshing. It is challenging. It is working with games. There are complicated pieces of software, and if you imagine what it takes to make a fighting game versus what it takes to make, say, a racing game or a game in the scale of an MMO or a grand strategy game, they're completely different, and they present new and interesting challenges. And people like me, they're suckers for that kind of stuff. I'd love to work on an RTS at some point. The player reception. Don't we all want to see what players think when they pick up the game? It needs some. You can need to have some tough skin sometimes, but you will always cater to a niche of players that are there, that love your game, and that's worth everything. It doesn't matter if it's 10, if it's 100, if it's tens of thousands or even millions. Like, I've had save files of a game I worked on sent to me over Discord to find issues with the game so I could release a hotfix the next day. And the players were so grateful, and all of this was worth it. It does not matter if I fixed an issue for 20 people. It was still worth it. But ultimately, we need a healthy dose of masochism, because we could be possibly doing something else. We could be doing something that pays more and works less hours, but would it be as fun? From AAA to Z. So I'm guessing you know by now these are not battery types that I'm talking about. It's mostly budget and resources. That's the difference between all the A's. And actually, there's mostly just AA and AAA when it comes to this. So take a AA game. They're mostly worked by mid-sized studios, take 50 to 100 people, use it in an external publisher. Publisher will be the studio that helps you getting the game out of the door. They provide you with resources like marketing, testing, and just all the infrastructure that comes to what it takes to actually release a game on a given platform. Little Nightmares 2, what I've worked on, was a good example of this, since Tarsier Studios, a company this size, does not have the kind of resources that it takes to release this, but the IP is co-owned with Bandai Namco, which is a huge machine that can provide all these resources. Then take AAA games that generally have hundreds of people. A typical Ubisoft game will have 400 to 600 people working as developers on their open world games. And borderline, they don't cost less than $50 million. It's typically much more than that, like Wars Outlaws. We also have indie games. Generally, they're smaller teams. They retain the creative vision. They don't have any external stakeholders getting their opinions on how the game should be, but also you're dependent on your own budget. Sometimes crowdfunding. You can make fantastic pieces of work, and there's amazing indie games. I'm giving the example of Celeste, a game that I particularly love. And there's the other extent, which is the AAA games, which is normally regarded as the very high-budget indie games. In this case, I'm giving the Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice as example from Ninja Theory. They have higher budget and scope, a little bit more akin to AA games, I'll say, but they still retain their indie freedom and creativity. So to make these games, we need a game engine. So they can range from anything like a programming framework to a full-fledged content creation tool. And some of the options we have available to general public are Unreal, Unity, Godot. And there's many in-house options, that they're used by big companies like EA, Ubisoft, and Crytek, and some people who just develop their own custom engine, which was the case at my first gaming job. All of them have pros and cons. Commercial engines will have licensing costs sometimes, and in-house engines are made tailored specifically for the game you want to make. But their documentation is typically tends to be a little bit more scarce and not as easily available as the ones that you'd see provided to the public. And generally, the kind of game you want to make does sometimes impact your choice in engine. What the choice of game also impacts, or your decision, is which kind of platforms you want to release in. As I'm sure you'll know, there's many games that are PC only, or just console, or just mobile, sometimes all of them, or a combination thereof. There's a cross-platform. And it is very different to develop a game that is ready for PC and mobile than it is to develop a game that is for PlayStation and Xbox, since they're closer to being in parity with their features and the kind of hoops you have to jump in order to release on them, right? It's different to have a game that you control with a keyboard and mouse, or it is that you have a game control with a touchscreen. Plus, there's many other constraints that I'm going to mention. There's sometimes exclusivity deals. You might ask yourself, why does a game start by releasing on Epic Games Store 6 months before it comes out on Steam? And generally, the developers are paid for it. Or why does it pay lip service to a specific feature on Xbox? Microsoft is likely paying for this. So this also influences the kind of business deals you have with these providers. There's also first-party licensing costs. Dev kits in the past for Sony have cost some couple of $1,000s a pop, though these numbers are generally very heavily under NDA, and I don't have access to them to show you to you. Then there's the compliance requirements. What is this about compliance? Some of these platforms require you to conform to a large and huge list of requirements in order to even be accepted in their platform. Consoles are infamous for this. I can tell you that the compliance document for PlayStation is easily something like 150 pages long. Xbox must be over 100 as well. And it can be very time-consuming to conform to everything, and you'll get rejected a couple of times. In the first game we released on PlayStation, Sony bounced back our submission because the DualShock for a PS4 controller image was not exactly pixel perfect as they wanted it to be. And this is a good enough reason to be rejected. So how do games then like this get made? Besides miracles. AAA games in particular, they take anywhere from 3 to 6 years in average. I'm sure you'll know many that have taken much longer, and they're still under development. 200 to 600 developers at least. And again, also, as an example, Last of Us 2 took 2,000 developers over 7 years, to give you some reference. They're typically worked on across multiple studios globally because nobody has this kind of resources in a single place, and people don't the work of people don't cost the same in each country. So most studios this size, they're working distributed. And I'd say the main thing of a AAA game is the enormous scope. Scope management might be the hardest challenge that AAA games face, just because you're handling, 200 features more. And it is easy to go to scope creep, to want to do more than you can. It is easy to get stuck on the iteration loop and keep wanting to polish a feature, but ultimately you need to ship a game. And it requires very skilled project management and developers to be able to stick to this kind of plan. Therefore, the milestones and deliverables are extremely important. The development costs for these games are anywhere between $50 to $200 million, but they can easily be over 300 as well. And marketing costs generally are the double of development costs. Again, it can be even higher. So The game goes through a couple of phases. Generally goes to the ideation phase, which is conception, in which you do mostly research, prototype, and just try to generally prove, is your idea viable? The game generally faces a gate just before going to pre-production, which is the viability, or a kickoff gate, and a lot of games generally get killed at this point because they're not viable or they will probably won't be fun. And you need to, because it's a huge risk to commit to make a game that you don't know is going to be worth it. Once you kick off to pre-production, you kind of need to start preparing for production. That's exactly what it means. A game can stay 2 to 3 years in pre-production, and in some cases, because you need to be building the tools that will allow you to produce content more efficiently. You need to remove the risks that come in a production. So stuff that you do think that is risky, you better figure it out at this phase. You don't want to come into surprises when you start production, when the team scales up and starts building upon the assumptions that you've gotten up to this point. You better know what ground you're treading there. So for production, it's the phase when it does scale up, the majority of people are working in a project, and it's when really the majority of the code and assets is done. Some of the most common deliverables, as I've mentioned, are alpha. For a lot of companies, this will be kind of a vertical slice. That means that you want all the features to be in the game in some shape or form. Typically not with a lot of polish, but they should be representative of the final product. You should be able to play an alpha build of a game and know what are you getting, and know that the game is well in its way to reach a successful beta and be released. Because for beta, you do want the game to be a full polished experience and hopefully only debug left. In my experience, do you strive for this? It never really happens. There's always features being developed after that, and a lot more that is happening, but it is something good to aim for, because you typically do not have a lot of time between beta and master. What is master is typically you call it master or golden master to the version that the first parties approve for release. It is your version 1.0 if you'll have it. It is the version that will get printed into discs, if that's the case, or the version that will be available when the game drops. Then the game is not yet done. From master until release, generally people keep fixing bugs and sometimes even producing more content, which is infamously called into the day one patch, so that the players will experience a little bit more polished experience than they would if they would just have the game as is from version 1.0. This is a huge difference from games used to be 20 years ago, where you would often expect the game to be playable for years. Now, you cannot always expect that. You sometimes need a couple of fixes and expect this day one patch to actually make the game work as it should. Then congratulations, the game will be released. And then it comes the never-ending loop, hopefully the never-ending loop of the game being live, content updates, bug fixes, and hopefully you'll keep bringing in players for years to come. And you'll keep on this phase for as long as you need. So what is it like to work in AAA? The first thing that struck me as very different compared to anything else that I have worked on is the extremely high volume of communication, to the point that it really makes you humble how much you have to accept that you don't know and that you cannot know, possibly just because there's so much happening all at once. Therefore, because there are so many teams that work specialized by discipline. I can give you an example on Star Wars Outlaws in the programming teams. I was the lead gameplay programmer, so my team was the systems gameplay programming. We had 3C programming, which stands for character camera controls. It's typically shorthand for a lot of the moment-to-moment, what the player does. AI programming, UI programming, online programming. and tech and tools programming that the engine developers generally do. And then we have all the other developers who are sitting in other studios who typically have the setups mirrored. So it is a lot of specialized people across many, many studios and different time zones. When you work with as many studios, it is often better to split the work by mandate. And that means that you work in a specific set of features more or less independently so that there is less points of sync between you and what we can call the lead studio. However, this sometimes comes at the cost of mismatch of expectations from both parties. It can be hard to manage. So you can also integrate some of people from other studios into your teams. However, this also can cause problems because typically your team is co-located, and now you have people that are external to your team integrated remotely, and it can be hard to function as a cohesive team. Ultimately, it is a high-pressure, high-reward environment. There are many deadlines, pressure from publishers, pressure from fans, sometimes stakeholders, and many demos that sometimes need to happen. You know, there's used to be E3, now Game Fest. There is maybe a showroom demo. There's press comes in, and this all comes in the middle of your development and throws a wrench into your plans. So you have to really be nimble as much as you can and expect that it is a lot of work. However, it does really feel rewarding when it does reach out millions of players. Wanted to add a little note from my experience is that even on this kind of environment, meeting the people who you work with goes a long way into building a very good relationship that needs to last for years to come, because I've mentioned these are big projects. The people that I've met and my team has met, you know, the degree of empathy we've had for each other was completely different than people who've never seen it in the flesh. And you'll be working with these people for a lot. This, for me, is a requirement. There's nothing that can replace at least meeting people once. So I want to show you a little bit and talk to you about some features that I've worked with and what it took. So this is a Little Nightmares 2. I kept it as much spoiler-free as I could. And I want to show you the hand-holding mechanic. So for the hand-hold mechanic, it was an expensive feature. It took a lot of polish. I'm gonna play it for you and try to explain what's going on. So the player is pulling the AI character, and as you see, the movements that the player does will impact how the character moves, and it matters how fast the player moves. If it suddenly starts, the player would suddenly start running, pulling the character to the other side. It all matters in a matter of animations. And I remember vividly when we were sitting at the studio that the gameplay programmer Matthias was working with the animator Rory, and they both held hands, and they were just going around trying to replicate the same movements a player would do, and just go around, rotate with each other, and see how it would feel, and how would have to implement it and animate it. It's definitely a sight to behold, and I have very fond memories. It is a feature that was on the verge of being killed, but the team pushed so much for it because it adds so much flair to it, even though it has practically no gameplay impact. Then I want to show you, from Star Wars Outlaws, also keeping it as spoiler-free as I can, the transitions from level to level. So we called it the seamless transitions.
Let's get moving.
And what is going to be happening here is that we're transitioning from a planet level to a space level. So there is going to be some loading happening, unloading and loading, and the objective was that the player would not notice. Players know what's happening, but it's still, there's no suspension of disbelief because it ended up being pixel perfect, and you go into space and you continue playing, and it was all in kind of one shot. So I cannot keep talking about this feature because I could spend 1 hour very easily, but just the amount of work, the sheer amount of work I cannot measure, of so many talented technical artists, programmers, and animators to get to the point where you see no adjustment is unbelievable, and I'm extremely proud of having seen this feature from very close. If you want to know more about it, just grab me after. So I think I have to start wrapping up very fast. So you might be asking yourself, where is the money in this industry? Is there money? So since 2019, the industry has consistently had $180 billion in revenue, and it has only increased from there, and it's only projected to increase. As of 2022, I believe it was more than double what the film industry had made. You mentioned half the population in the world play games. That is actually almost true, and it is projected to get there. Currently, I think we sit at 3.3, 3.4 billion of players. As I mentioned, developer amount can go up to 300, 400 million in some cases. And just take the recent Insomniac titles, both released and in development, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3, and Marvel Wolverine. All of them are documented to have cost more than $300 million. And I have a little question for you. 2 games have sold more than 200 million units. Does anyone know or have guesses for which? That's correct. That's $200 million. There's one that sold more.
Elden Ring?
Not quite. Minecraft at 300 million copies. So there's definitely money in the industry. However, it'd be amiss of me not to mention that since 2023, there's upwards of, I would say, 23,000 of jobs that have been lost. So it is not always a stable industry. This is because game development costs so much, and you cannot always succeed. And again, I'm sure you know stories of games not succeeding that are very recent too. So where will the future of gaming be? There's been a rise of cloud gaming and streaming. Platforms like Game Pass, PlayStation Premium, and GeForce Now and Luna, and even the defunct Stadia. And it allows the democratization of access for many players to games because you do not need as powerful computers or hardware to experience games. AI and procedural content generation, and also even in gameplay, is here to stay. So it will allow us to build stuff at less costs. They're already being used a lot, and I expect for the future we'll see more of AI even in interfacing with gameplay, adapting AI dynamically, or even procedural storytelling. Just imagine for a second that you can have something akin to a tabletop RPG experience and a story molded for you. Could happen. It's not that distant. Player behavior will keep trending towards live service games. It's, again, already happening. So many games, people stick to it. They want to see more of them. They want to see the seasons. They want to engage with that content. They want to live in it, so to say. Fortnite is a great example of it. And we also cannot just miss the impact that streaming and content creation has had in the virality of some games. Among Us being a great example that was a hit caused by Twitch streamers. Plus, we can also have Twitch integration in games so that people interact with the game while it's being streamed. This still happens, but it will keep happening more and more, I believe. So main takeaways. Games are fun to make, but they can be a risky business. Game development costs are extremely high, and the industry is suffering because of that. So we definitely need to find ways to keep lowering costs. That don't mean firing people. So we need to leverage more and more of ways of making productions cheaper. A good way will be using some AI tools. It might be a controversial subject for the time being, but there needs to be some way of making some sort of the production a little bit cheaper. Playing games will become even more accessible, as I've mentioned. Cloud gaming is, in a lot of part, responsible for that. We'll see more games that converge in platforms. So phenomena like Genshin Impact that took the world by storm, sold, or rather had millions of downloads, made a lot of money, is available in a seamless experience between PC, console, and mobile, and it works perfectly. PUBG did something similar, so did Fortnite. Games that are there to target all platforms in ways that weren't before will be more prominent. And the mobile game sharing will keep increasing. So as of now, mobile gaming already accounts for more than all the share of gaming, more than PC, more than console, which is actually decreasing, and it's never really stopped growing since its inception. So cannot really disregard mobile. Also, the how players engage with the game is in constant change, and this is very important because how players want to experience different business models that maybe 5 years ago or 7 years ago, battle passes were not a thing. And now they're kind of a standard in free-to-play business models. The fact that paid games were the norm 15 years ago, but then free-to-play games came over, then it came freemium models. Now we're seeing back a little bit going to paid games again and keeping microtransactions. All of this is in constant change, and developers have to stay adaptable to these changes. We cannot base ourselves just on what we know. We have to stay alert, look at the market, see what people consume. What they consume is not what we used to consume as players. So it is very important we never really forget it. Thank you so much.